Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Pagelow and I'm the creator of the webcomic Bunny. And I'm recording this from my home in Chicago in the United States. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank Pixel Show for inviting me to talk at their virtual festival this year. I wish I could be there in person. I've been to Brazil a couple times and really enjoyed it. I even danced in the Sambódromo in Rio de Janeiro during Carnival with a Brazilian friend. So Brazil is an amazing country and I can't wait to go back. Now in my presentation, I'll talk about how I create comics, how I use images to tell a story without any words, and how I developed a following on Instagram. I'll also talk about some of the unusual responses I've gotten online from my cartoons that went viral. So let's begin. First, a little bit about me. I've drawn comics most of my life. I doodled in class during elementary school, and I drew single panel comics in middle school and sold little photocopied books in a local comic book shop. Then I started drawing comics for my high school and college newspapers and eventually wrote for Mad Magazine. I now pretty much focus on webcomics. So one of the things that really drew me to webcomics as an art form is that it's ephemeral. I make it, and before people even read it, I'm already working on the next one. It's like Tibetan sand art to me. I create it, and then it's just pixels blowing away on the internet. Its lifespan is short and quick. It only takes a couple seconds to read a comic, so for me, the enjoyment is really in its creation. Now a little bit about my comic. Bunny is basically a visually cute but slightly dark comic about a bunny with terrible luck. One of the things that makes my comic unique is that I don't use any dialogue. It's a mostly wordless comic that relies on images to tell the story. I created Bunny for the Comic Strip Superstar contest in 2009, and at the time I was trying to decide whether the main character should be a panda or a rabbit, and eventually decided to use a rabbit. That's why Bunny has the black arms, legs, and ears, kind of like a panda. After I was a finalist in the contest, I decided to create a website and I started posting them online in 2010. It quickly developed a following, more so than any other comic I had created until then. Now, I didn't set out to create a mostly wordless comic. The first Bunny comic I made was wordless, so then I made the next one wordless and the next one and so on. Then it kind of became Bunny's thing. Creating wordless comics is very hard, especially doing it in a tiny space like in a webcomic. That's why I often rely on simple emotions that people can quickly visually understand, such as comics related to love, rejection, jealousy, getting even, hunger, comics related to modern life like phones, using Zoom, social media, streaming movies. And I like to draw inanimate objects coming to life with thoughts and feelings such as cupcakes, hot dogs, pizza, because you already know things about them, so you immediately kind of understand what motivates them or what their world might be like. Also, I made the comic specifically for the internet rather than for newspapers, so I wanted something that could be understood by people in other countries who don't speak English. The internet has no borders, and I wanted a comic that could easily move around the web without any language barriers. So for example, Bunny has been published weekly in the magazine Internazionale in Italy since 2013. And it was published for a couple years in the South Metropolis daily newspaper in Guangzhou, China. For 5 years, I created an exclusive Bunny comic for Webtoon, which is a South Korean company, which launched an international English language version of their website and app. And on social media, the majority of my more than 600,000 followers now live in other countries besides the United States. For example, more than 7% of my followers live in Brazil. Over the years, as the international audience has grown, I've changed the comic format to better fit social media. Even though I still draw the comics in a traditional horizontal comic strip format that is common in newspapers, at least American newspapers, I make sure it can be split in half and stacked on top of each other to better fit a phone screen. So making sure it looks good on a phone is now more important than how it looks on a desktop computer, at least for me, since most of my viewers are seeing them on their phone. For Instagram, I post my comics at about 1800 pixels by 1500 pixels. And for Twitter, I still leave my comics horizontal because they appear better in the timelines that way. One thing I noticed during the rise of social media is that my audience has changed. When I first started my comic online, it was mostly a male audience, and now on Instagram, more than 60% of my audience is actually female. I also noticed when I posted dark comics on Instagram, my audience did not grow as fast as when I posted lighter, more happy comics, since people tend to share things that make them happy. So I started shifting the comic to posting more happy ones. I still occasionally post dark ones, but not as dark as when I first created the comic. Another change I've made is that when I began Buni, I used to create a lot of comics based on his love for a girl that didn't love him back. It used to be funny and cute in a sad kind of way, that he loved her and always tried to impress her, but she clearly had a boyfriend and was not interested. But in 2020, it just doesn't seem appropriate anymore that a guy should like a girl and keep pursuing her even though she doesn't want to be anything more than a friend to him. So I've kind of ended that storyline. I added in a nerdy girl that likes him, but love is only funny when it's unrequited. And when two people love each other, it's not really funny. So the awkward chase is what is actually funny. Another thing about social media is generally when I post a comic, I add a little text to the post. I wish I could just post my comics without any commentary, but I feel like people expect you to say something when you post an image, so I have to come up with something to say. I find that it is often harder than actually creating a comic sometimes. How do you say something about a wordless comic that doesn't explain the joke or pooch the joke? I wish I could tell you the secret to growing your audience on Instagram or other social media, and if I knew the secret, I would be using it to grow my audience. All I really do is post comics a couple times a week, and it just kind of organically grows. If people like something or if they're moved by it in some way, they will share it, and hopefully they'll credit you when they post it. I'm not very active on social media as myself as a real person in real life. I rarely post personal things. I think if I did, I would probably have many more followers. But in real life, I don't spend that much time on social media. I always try to respond to people, though when they direct message me on Instagram or Twitter or send me an email, I answer their questions and thank them for reading my comics. I want readers to feel free to do that and be accessible to them. Since I create a wordless comic, I sketch out my ideas. I still sketch them out using a regular number 2 pencil on regular paper. I write for about an hour, several times a week, and in an hour I might come up with about 5 comic ideas. Of those 5 ideas, only one of them will probably be good enough to actually become a final comic. So I have a large pile of rejected ideas. Once I have a good idea that is worth drawing into a final comic, I start with penciling. When I originally created Buni, I drew the comics on 11 by 14 inch Bristol paper. I sketched it out with a blue pencil and then inked it with a Rapidograph .08 pen. But for the last 3 years, I've drawn my comics digitally, completely digitally, which speeds up the process. I have created templates for different panel compositions, so I don't have to draw them from scratch each time. I draw my final comics on a Wacom Mobile Studio Pro tablet and use the program Clip Studio Paint. I like the tablet because it's portable, so if I travel somewhere, I can easily bring it, and it doesn't have to be connected to a desktop. And Clip Studio Paint is like Photoshop, but with more features geared toward illustration. One of my favorites is a setting that helps stabilize your line. When I first transitioned to drawing on a tablet, the glass felt a little slippery, and the stabilization setting helps to keep my lines smooth and a little less wobbly. So after penciling, inking, and coloring the comic on the tablet, I open the file in Photoshop on a desktop to format the comic for whatever platform it'll be published on. I find that using a mouse and having a keyboard for renaming files is just easier than doing it on a tablet, although I can do it all on the tablet if I'm traveling. It just takes a little longer. This year, Pixel Show is asking the question, how will creativity be 150 years from now? My answer is that the world will continue to be more and more globalized. The internet is creating ways for people around the world to connect and share that was never possible before. Also, anyone with an internet connection can post their own videos, music, photos, and essays directly online and find their own audience. You no longer need to rely on gatekeepers such as mainstream editors, publishers, and television or film producers. Your work has its own power. You can create your own platform and develop your own unique audience. And the smartphones you carry in your pocket are amazing cameras. They're practically your own photo and video studio. It's making the technology accessible to more and more people, and I see that continuing over the next decades. So while different parts of the world are still very distinct, it's becoming much easier to communicate and relate to people around the world. We're all watching many of the same movies and listening to the same music. Our lives are revolving around the same devices, such as phones and computers. Our lives are more relatable than ever before in history, but it's not without its challenges. The internet is a strange place, and social media is an even crazier place. So for me, creating a wordless comic means I'm not using words to tell you what is happening in the comic. Your brain has to quickly understand the images and what it all means. But online and in social media, which is global, everybody comes to the comic from a different reference point. So seeing the same image, people jump to different conclusions about what the comic means. For example, I posted this comic on Instagram just before I went to bed. And while I was sleeping, there was a terrorist attack in the early morning hours in the United Kingdom where someone had driven a vehicle through a crowd of people, killing many people. So when I woke up, I had several angry messages that my comic was tasteless and how could I do this at this time. Even though my comic was posted hours before the attack and I was in a different time zone, people were waking up and seeing it in their timeline at the same time as the news coverage of the attack in that particular country. So it was one of the few times I deleted a post, but it just shows how in a globalized world where social media has no borders, you don't necessarily know what's on people's mind in different parts of the world. And on social media, I don't mind if people share my comics. Actually, I think it's very helpful as long as they credit me. There are many Instagram accounts that steal other creators' work and they don't credit the original source. Some even Photoshop out my name. I get messages from followers when they see someone using my comic without crediting me, which is helpful so I can write to those people. But the worst offenders are those who modify my comic to create memes. Some right-wing groups have used this particular comic. They inserted words to change the meaning to be anti-immigrant or anti-Muslim. And when I find out about it, I try to track the source and ask them to cease and desist. And here is another example of cultural misunderstanding. When I created this comic, the joke is that the hot dog has run out of buns because it's laundry day. So he's wrapping himself in a regular piece of bread instead. And I didn't realize that in Australia, this is actually normal food. It's called a sausage sizzle. And Australians apparently love them. They wrap their hot dogs in bread. And I think they fry it. As the creator of a comic without any words, one of the last people I thought I would hear from was a linguist. But a linguist in Colombia contacted me because he wanted to use my comic to study the variations of English Creole spoken on a Colombian island. He showed my comic to the residents there and asked them to describe what was happening in the comic, to document the variations of the Creole words that they used to describe the comic. Now, this one is one of my most viral comics I ever made because it's at the heart of the debate over whether pineapple and pizza belong together or not. And a college student actually contacted me that she wanted to write a research paper on the meaning of the comic, which was kind of interesting to read. One of my favorite reactions to a comic of mine was when a crematorium in New Zealand contacted me to create a billboard featuring one of my comics. I think I freaked them out when I wrote back that I would be honored if they featured my artwork on a billboard advertising a crematorium. The weirdest thing is that this is the comic that they wanted to use. Snowmen at a funeral with a bucket of melted snow in a casket. I don't know how this would help their business, but apparently they thought it would. And over the years, I've had a couple people ask me to tattoo Buni on themselves. I generally try to talk them out of it since I feel a little weird having someone walking around with my drawing tattooed permanently on their body. But occasionally they do it anyway. And if it makes them happy, more power to them. This week, I actually had someone ask me for help in drawing a comic to propose to his girlfriend. This is not the first time someone has asked me to do that. This particular person didn't know what he wanted me to draw. He just wanted Bunny, and he wanted it to be acidic, which I wanted to tell him that proposals should be nice, not dark or acidic. Anyway, I've drawn a couple commissions for couples before and helped a kid ask a girl out to the prom. She actually turned him down. It's always strange, but I appreciate the challenge of trying to help people out. And a couple of filmmakers have created short films based on Buni Comics, and some have made animations too. For example, I collaborated with a guy in the Czech Republic to make this animation. I'd love to work in animation more since I like the mix of movement and sound, which really helps to communicate ideas without using any dialogue. Here's another animation that we did together. It's also pretty dark. You wouldn't believe how hard it was to get the sound just right of a dog drowning to death in a well. No dogs were harmed in creating this animation. Now, since I have some leftover time, I wanted to show you some of my rejected ideas. Now, the majority of my rejected comics are rejected because they're just not funny, or maybe they're similar to something I've done before. But these rejected ideas are ones that I think are funny, but are too dark or too weird to post. And one of the things that I find people really don't find funny are dead babies. Personally, I think these comics are funny and I'd love to post them, but I recognize that it is too painful and sad for some people, especially those who have actually lost children. This is a coronavirus comic I made. I think it's great, but I still think it's too soon. Death is a little touchy. It's one of many coronavirus comics I've sketched out but have not published. When the pandemic first began, it was hard to be funny. Everyone was obsessed with the coronavirus and scared and reading the news 24/7. It felt like if you created something irreverent or silly, people would look at you like, how can you be laughing when people are dying right now? And on top of that, this summer, it was also hard to create funny comics during the height of the protests against police brutality and racial injustice here in the United States, because I felt like everyone was very serious and not in a mood to laugh. And how can you create comics at a time like this? I think I didn't post comics for a week, which is very unusual, but it just didn't feel right at the time. But when things are dark, laughter still is the best medicine. That's why I created this book of Buni Comics called Happiness is a State of Mind. One of the reasons I really like the character Bunny is that he's always positive. Even though the cute world he lives in is usually out to get him, nothing will keep him down, because true happiness is a state of mind. So that concludes my little talk. If you'd like to read more of my comics, follow me on Instagram or Twitter. I also have books available on Amazon, or if you'd like a signed copy, you can order one through me. And if you have any questions, feel free to write me anytime at bunicomic@gmail.com. Again, I'd like to thank you for listening to me and for reading Bunny. Obrigado.